Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. The message arrived at midnight, cutting through the steady hum of cosmic radiation like a blade through silk. It was not the first anomaly ever detected, nor would it be the last. Over the years, humanity had grown accustomed to the strange, to the distant murmurs of an infinite universe. Most were false alarms, bursts of quasars, pulsar echoes, the long-decayed remnants of supernovae whispering across the void. But this was different. The signal came in clear, deliberate, unwavering. It did not flicker, did not waver, did not stretch and distort across the light years like the wandering remnants of something lost. It was precise, 15 minutes of rhythmic pulses, a sequence too structured to be anything but artificial. No modulation, no discernible language, no encoded message that human systems could yet decipher, just a presence announcing itself in the only way it could. And then silence. For a time, it was assumed to be an accident, a natural phenomenon dressed in the illusion of intelligence, a trick played by physics and probability. Yet the more the astronomers studied it, the less sense it made. The frequency was too exact, the pauses between bursts eerily methodical, as though waiting for something, someone to listen. Within hours, the world's most advanced observatories, working in desperate coordination, confirmed the impossible. The signal had originated from a system nearly 100 light-years away, a place marked on no major star maps, void of habitable planets, with no prior signs of activity. It had been, for all recorded history, silent. Until now. But it was not the message itself that sent the world into disarray. It was what followed. Even as analysts pored over the data, as radio telescopes locked onto the distant coordinates with breathless anticipation, something else became clear. Other signals, ones that had long been monitored, studied, even responded to, were vanishing. The once busy hum of the universe, the telltale pulses of intelligent life scattered across the galaxy, were going dark. First, a faint whisper from a colony orbiting Tau Ceti abruptly ceased. Then, a distant transmission from a deep space mining station circling Altair 7 fell silent. The slow but steady conversation humanity had once shared with Proxima b, fragmented and halting, but real, simply stopped. And it was not just the transmissions we were receiving. All outgoing attempts at communication to these civilizations went unanswered, as though they had simply disappeared. Within days, the realization took hold. The message we had received was no simple greeting, no cry for help, no lost fragment of some forgotten civilization. It was something else entirely. A warning, perhaps, or worse, a test. The world reeled. News spread like wildfire, igniting panic and fascination in equal measure. Scientists debated theories with voices raw from sleepless nights, each more terrifying than the last. Was this an extermination? A forced silence? Had these civilizations chosen to vanish, to go dark, in response to whatever had spoken from the void? Governments moved quickly. Emergency councils formed behind closed doors, deciding how much to tell the public and how best to prepare for an unknown threat. The military braced for conflict without a visible enemy, scanning the heavens as though an invasion fleet might materialize at any moment. Satellites were redirected, deep space radars recalibrated, hidden bunkers stirred to life after decades of dormancy. And yet, even with all this movement, all this desperate action, one truth remained unshaken. We did not know what we were up against. Then came the second transmission. This one shorter, sharper, directed not at the void, not at the galaxy at large, but at Earth itself. You are not afraid. It was not a question. It was not a challenge. It was an observation. A simple statement, stripped of curiosity or emotion, as though it had watched and understood exactly what humanity had chosen to do. In the face of an unknown force, where others had fled, we had stayed. Where others had chosen silence, we had spoken. Where the galaxy had recoiled, we had reached forward. And in that moment, the decision was made. We would not run. We would not fall into silence. We would go, not to flee, not to hide, to find whoever or whatever was waiting. The Icarus initiative had been set in motion with a momentum that no force on Earth could halt. Engineers worked around the clock, refining and assembling what was to be humanity's most daring creation. Politicians argued, military strategists whispered in classified chambers, and the world at large held its breath, caught between anticipation and dread. The launch was inevitable, but inevitability did not make it simple. Beneath the surface, not everyone was convinced that this was the right path. Some questioned the wisdom of engaging with something that had silenced entire civilizations. Others saw the transmission as a warning, a cosmic omen demanding reverence, not pursuit. Across the world, factions emerged, scientific communities that championed exploration, religious sects that preached restraint, survivalists who prepared for an extinction event of unknowable origin. Every great moment in human history had been shadowed by division, and this was no different. Yet, in the halls where the true decisions were made, none of it mattered. The plan was moving forward. For those tasked with making the journey, doubt was a luxury they could not afford. The crew had been selected not just for their expertise, but for their capacity to suppress fear. They had been tested, scrutinized, pushed beyond what most would endure. Psych evaluations measured their responses to isolation, to catastrophe, to the idea that they might never return. The final candidates were not just the best. They were the ones who refused to break. Dr. Elias Vance had spent decades theorizing about first contact. He had pored over every known exoplanet, every irregular pulse of cosmic radio waves, every fragment of speculative xenolinguistics. Now, he was about to step into the void he had studied his entire life. Naomi Cade had piloted deep space missions that had pushed the limits of human endurance. She had seen ships torn apart by cosmic radiation, had navigated through asteroid fields where a miscalculated trajectory meant certain death. There was no one more suited to guide Icarus across the abyss. Rafik El-Amin, a man whose official records were redacted beyond readability, was there for reasons that no one fully understood. The others knew better than to ask. Lin Yujin had spent years decoding the cognition patterns of Europa's subglacial life forms, a skill that would prove invaluable if humanity had to decipher something truly alien. And then there was Arthur Rourke, the most controversial inclusion. Rourke was not a scientist. He was not an engineer, nor a soldier. He was a journalist, a storyteller, a man whose job was not to shape history, but to record it. His presence on the mission had been debated endlessly, and even among the crew, there were those who resented him. Why waste a precious seat on someone with no technical expertise? Why bring a civilian on what might be humanity's last journey? But Rourke understood his role better than anyone. If they returned, his words would define what the world remembered. If they didn't, he would be the only voice left to explain why. Their final briefing took place in a room that did not officially exist, beneath the Geneva facility that no civilian would ever enter. The table was bare except for a single sheet of paper, a relic of a time when information had once been written down instead of existing only in encrypted data streams. The general standing before them had no insignia, no visible rank. He belonged to no nation, no organization that could be named. His voice was calm, but his words carried a weight that even the silence of space would struggle to match. "Your mission is not to make contact," he said. "Your mission is to observe, to gather intelligence, and to return. If possible." That last phrase hung in the air like a storm cloud. If possible. It was not a warning. It was an acknowledgement that the galaxy was no longer a place of certainty. We do not know what happened to the others. We do not know why the transmission stopped. But we know this: something is watching us now. No one spoke. No one asked the question that had been circling in their minds since the beginning. Why us? But they knew the answer. They had been chosen because they did not look at the void and tremble. They had been chosen because they would not hesitate. The following weeks were a blur of preparation, of final simulations, of goodbyes that were spoken carefully, as if words could make the weight of leaving easier to bear. The Icarus was a marvel of human ingenuity and desperation. It was not built for beauty, nor for comfort. It was built to defy the impossible. Its Alcubierre drive, an untested miracle of theoretical physics, would fold space itself, shortening the distance between stars in a way no previous ship had ever achieved. If it worked, they would reach their destination in a matter of years rather than centuries. If it failed, they would drift in the void, lost to the silence that had already swallowed so many before them. Launch day arrived without ceremony. There was no grand parade, no speech for the masses. The world would watch, of course, but from a distance. Those in power knew that this moment did not belong to them. It belonged to the 5 people who were about to step beyond the edge of everything humanity had ever known. As they strapped in, the weight of history pressed against them like an unseen force. Not fear, not hesitation, just the quiet, crushing certainty that when they looked back, Earth would already be a memory. Mission Control's voice crackled through the comms, steady, unwavering. Godspeed, Icarus. We'll be listening. The engines ignited. The ship trembled. The Earth fell away. For the first time in history, humanity stopped watching the stars, and the stars began watching back. The jump was over. The universe had reassembled itself around them, but it was not the same. Or maybe they weren't the same. Inside Icarus, everything was silent except for the hum of the ship's systems, the quiet rasp of breath through the comms, and the occasional tap of fingers against glass as someone checked their instruments for the 100th time. The Alcubierre drive had done its job. In less than 3 minutes, they had crossed a distance that should have taken decades. And yet, as they drifted into what should have been familiar space, something felt wrong. Commander Naomi Cade unstrapped herself first, moving with the deliberate control of someone waiting for the universe to correct itself. Status check, she ordered, her voice even. One by one, the crew responded. Life support, holding steady. Structural integrity, no breaches. Navigation, stable. Alcubierre field, collapsed as expected. First jump complete, Elias Vance murmured, his fingers flying over his console. The physicist had spent his career theorizing about this moment, about space bending at humanity's command. And yet, now that it had happened, he simply stared at the data, brow furrowed. 5 years of travel compressed into 3 minutes. He exhaled, shaking his head. We're breaking laws we don't even understand yet. Rafik El-Amin, sitting at his station, let out a dry chuckle. So we skipped across half a galaxy and lived to tell about it. Either we're geniuses, or the universe hasn't figured out how to punish us yet. Lynn Nugent, who had remained unervingly quiet, spoke without looking up from her console. We should be seeing signals by now. Deep space probes, human transmissions, anything. Her fingers tapped against the screen, adjusting frequencies. But I'm getting nothing. Arthur Rourke, strapped in near the observation deck, glanced up from his own monitor. Not even background chatter. Lynn shook her head. It's not just quiet. It's empty. The silence stretched, pressing in on them. They had known the risk. They had understood that stepping into the unknown meant the possibility of finding nothing. But understanding was different from experiencing it. Cade straightened. Keep scanning. We need more data before we assume anything. The crew worked, running diagnostics, recalibrating their instruments. Hours passed in meticulous routine, the kind meant to reassure them that things were under control. But no matter how many times they adjusted, checked, or recalibrated, the results remained unchanged. There was nothing out here. And then, the stars moved. Arthur saw it first. He had been watching the external feeds, cycling through the vast emptiness beyond the ship, when something in his brain recoiled, a quiet, instinctual alarm ringing from a part of him that hadn't been useful since humans had first crawled from the caves and into the dark. He leaned forward. Something was wrong. Guys. His voice sounded thin, distant. I need a second pair of eyes on this. Rafik rolled his chair over. What am I looking at? Arthur pointed, tracing a path between 3 stars on his screen. That star, and that one, and that one. They're out of place. At first, Rafik frowned, not understanding. Then, his expression darkened. He tapped a few keys, cross-checking their location with their navigation logs. The numbers didn't match. "That's not possible," Rafik muttered. By now, Lynn and Elias had moved to his side, their own instruments confirming what the cameras had caught. The stars surrounding Icarus were not where they should have been. They weren't drifting. They were adjusting. "That's not parallax error," Elias said, voice tight. "That's movement." Kate had been listening from across the cabin. She unstrapped herself and floated toward them, her expression unreadable. "Clarify," she ordered. Arthur's throat felt dry. "The stars are moving. Not randomly. They're shifting around us." Lynn's hands flew over her console. "It has to be a distortion effect from the drive." "It's not." Elias cut her off, his voice suddenly sharp. "The Alcubierre field collapsed 5 hours ago. We're in normal space." That left only one possibility. Something was manipulating their environment. The realization settled over them like ice water. The universe, vast and indifferent, was not supposed to react to a single ship. Space was supposed to be empty, predictable. It did not rearrange itself around visitors. Cade's jaw tightened. "Weapon status?" Rafik barely hesitated. "Active. But let's be honest, if we need them, we're already screwed." Arthur's skin crawled. He was no scientist, no soldier, but even he could feel it. They were not alone. Elias exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to focus. Could be automated defenses. A reaction to our arrival. Lynn shook her head. Then why didn't it react to the jump? Why wait until we were settled? Rafik muttered, "Because it wanted us to notice." Cade's gaze flicked between them, calculating. Then, finally, "We need answers." Elias, Lynn, analyze the movement patterns. See if there's a logic to it. "Arthur, I want continuous visual feed on every external camera. If anything changes, I want to know before it does." She turned toward her own console, fingers moving swiftly over the controls. "And Icarus?" she called out, addressing the ship's AI. A smooth, synthetic voice responded, awaiting command. "Run a full-spectrum scan of the surrounding sector. Look for anomalies, anything that doesn't behave the way it should." "Understood." Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, just as Arthur was about to speak again, Icarus delivered its results. Anomalous readings detected. Object of indeterminate mass located approximately 0 Australian dollars and 40 cents from vessel. Non-reflective. Emitting no heat signature. Movement unobservable except for gravitational displacement of local star patterns. Arthur felt his pulse hammer in his throat. Lynn's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. It's not just invisible. It's erasing its own presence." Naomi Cade's fingers curled into a fist. "Whatever it is, it knows we're here." No one spoke. No one needed to. They had come searching for an answer. And something had just noticed them looking. The anomaly did not move. It did not spin, drift, or pulse like a celestial body caught in the slow dance of gravity. It simply existed, a presence in the void, refusing to be seen, yet impossible to ignore. It was not black in the way deep space was black. It was something else entirely, a blankness, an absence, a wound carved into the universe. Inside Icarus, the crew stared at their instruments, waiting for something, anything that might make sense of it. But there was nothing to interpret. The object, if it could even be called that, was not emitting energy, not reflecting light, not interacting with matter in any measurable way. And yet, it was affecting the very fabric of space. Elias Vance sat rigid at his station, his hands hovering over the controls as if uncertain where to begin. "This isn't just a cloaked object," he murmured. It's like space refuses to acknowledge it." Lynn Nugent swallowed, still tapping rapidly at her console. "I'm running gravitational scans again. It's only detectable through displacement, but even that isn't consistent. It's like it's phasing in and out of existence." Arthur Rourke, seated near the observation deck, tore his eyes away from the external feed. "We're talking about something that's there and not there at the same time." Elias exhaled, rubbing his temple. "More like it exists outside of our ability to measure." We're seeing its effect, but not the thing itself. Doesn't that mean it could be anything? Rafik Elamin muttered, arms crossed over his chest. A ship, a structure, a goddamn black hole? How do you prepare for something that refuses to be identified? No one had an answer. Commander Naomi Cade leaned against the control panel, studying the shifting data. Her expression was unreadable, but Arthur could tell she was calculating, stripping away emotion to focus on the mission. That was her strength. Finally, she spoke. Icarus, analyze possible trajectories. If it's moving, I want to know its destination. The AI responded immediately. Object maintains no discernible velocity. There is no trajectory. Then what the hell is it doing? Rafik muttered. Arthur's gaze flicked back to the monitor. Waiting. The word settled heavily in the cabin. Cade straightened. We can't sit here speculating. We go closer. Rafik's jaw tightened. I assume that's a discussion, not an order. Cade met his stare, unflinching. We came here to find answers. That thing is the only lead we have. Elias sighed. I hate to agree, but we don't have another play. Whatever this is, it's the only anomaly in the entire sector. We need more data. Lynn hesitated, her fingers hovering over the interface. If it reacts to us, we have no idea what we're dealing with. We never did, Cade countered. But I refuse to go home with nothing. Rafik exhaled sharply, then nodded. Fine, but I want weapons primed. If that thing so much as twitches, I want the option to fight back. Noted, Cade said. Elias, adjust our approach vector. Lynn, monitor fluctuations. If this thing changes in any way, I want to know before it happens. Arthur remained silent, watching the others move. It was strange. His entire career had been about documenting history, standing on the edges of conflict and discovery. Now he was in the center of it, staring at something that had never been recorded, never been spoken of. For the first time, he wondered if it was meant to stay that way. The engines thrummed softly as Icarus adjusted course, inching toward the void. The closer they got, the worse it felt. It was subtle at first, a sensation, not a measurable force, an instinctual wrongness, as though something unseen was brushing against their minds, something too vast, too alien, pressing against the fragile limits of human comprehension. Lynn's voice came quiet, hesitant. Does anyone else feel that? No one wanted to answer. The ship drew closer, and the anomaly reacted. The stars bent, not in the way light refracted through a gravitational lens. This was different. They twisted, folding inward like reality itself was warping around the presence of the void. The darkness grew deeper, wider, as if it had noticed them and was adjusting itself accordingly. Then the ship lurched. The impact alarms flared to life. Consoles flickered, screens distorting with unreadable data. Icarus had not been hit. There was no collision, no force applied, yet it reeled as if the very space around it had been shaken like a rug snapped in the wind. Icarus, report. Cade shouted over the alarms. The AI's voice crackled, distorted. Spatial disruption detected. Integrity stable. Caution advised. Arthur braced himself against the panel, his pulse hammering. That's it. Caution advised. Elias' voice was sharp, frantic. I don't think it's attacking. I think it's adjusting. Lynn's screen flickered, an unnatural pattern rippling across the data stream. Oh my God. This isn't a ship. This isn't a structure. It's a presence. A sharp, rhythmic signal pulsed through their systems. One sound, then another. A pattern. A response. It's communicating, Lynn breathed. Rafik's fingers hovered over the weapon's control. That doesn't mean friendly. Cade's breathing was steady, controlled, but Arthur could see the tension in her jaw. This was not in the mission plan. No one had expected this. The pulse came again. A sound without sound. A pattern without meaning. Or perhaps, a meaning they were never meant to understand. Arthur's hands shook as he stared at the screen. We reached for something, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. And it's reaching back. The ship trembled again, a deep reverberation through metal and bone, and suddenly it was closer. The void had moved, or maybe it had never needed to move at all. Something looked at them. No one saw it, no one could, and yet they all felt it. A weight beyond gravity. A presence beyond space. Kate inhaled sharply. Elias. And then the world broke. The moment Icarus fractured from reality, time lost meaning. There was no violence, no sound, no force. One instant, they were in the cockpit, their minds racing, their bodies tensed. The next, they were elsewhere. Naomi Cade's breath caught in her throat. She was still on the ship. She could feel the straps across her chest, the weight of her own body. But everything around her was wrong. The walls of the cabin stretched and curled at impossible angles, the metal panels rippling like fabric caught in a slow-motion breeze. Color she had no words for bled into the edges of her vision. Not light, not shadow, something else entirely. Then came the voices. Not words, not even sounds. Intentions pressing against her mind, skimming just beyond comprehension. They weren't spoken, but she felt them, as if her thoughts had been invaded by something that existed too far outside human experience to translate itself properly. She turned her head, barely aware of her own movement. The crew was still there. Elias, gripping the sides of his console, knuckles bloodless. Lynn, her eyes flickering between the monitors, mouth parted in something between awe and terror. Rafik, still holding the weapon's control, though his fingers trembled. And Arthur, his face pale, as if he had already seen what lay beyond the edges of this impossible moment. The thing, the absence, the presence, the intelligence that had erased itself from the universe, was with them now. Not in the room, not even near the ship, but everywhere. It did not have form. It did not need one. It existed in the way gravity existed, in the way time moved forward without needing permission. And it was watching. Elias's breath was ragged. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It's not. It's a construct." He exhaled sharply. "It's how our brains are processing something that doesn't belong in physical space." Lynn's fingers dug into the panel. "Then what the hell is it?" The pressure increased. Not a sound, not a force, but awareness. They had reached out, and now it reached back, folding around them like a tide reclaiming the shore. Then finally, meaning. A single concept, vast and dense, slammed into Cade's mind. She flinched as it unraveled within her, a wordless message pouring into her thoughts in a rush of sensation, emotion, and impossible understanding. "You are seen." Her pulse pounded against her ribs. "It's communicating." Arthur's voice was hoarse. "That's the problem. If it's speaking to us, it means it thinks we can understand." Elias's hands were shaking. What if we can't? Another wave of intention crashed through them. A presence sifting through their thoughts, their memories, pulling apart everything they were and putting it back together just slightly wrong. Lynn gasped. "It's reading us." Rafik's jaw locked. "Or rewriting us." A ripple moved through the ship, bending the metal, stretching the dimensions of the room like they were no more fixed than a reflection on water. The presence wasn't attacking. It was testing. Naomi clenched her teeth. "Icarus, status report." Silence. "Icarus, respond." The AI's voice crackled through the speakers, fragmented, distorted. Connection disrupted. Interference detected. Cognitive instability. Arthur let out a sharp breath. "It's not just warping space. It's warping us." Panic tightened in Cade's chest, but she forced it down. "I need solutions. Now." Elias was already scanning the data. "If we're inside something, we need a breakout before we lose any sense of reality." Lynn's fingers moved quickly, trying to stabilize the ship's systems. "We need an anchor, something that's still real." Rafik's voice cut in. "I'll give you one. The weapons." Cade turned sharply. "We don't even know if it's hostile." "Everything about this is hostile." Rafik snapped. "We're breaking apart. You think we can talk our way out of this?" Arthur's voice was eerily calm. "What happens if you shoot at something that thinks in ways we don't even understand?" Rafik's grip tightened on the controls. "I'm willing to find out." Another pulse surged through the ship, and suddenly, Cade wasn't standing in Icarus anymore. She was somewhere else. She saw planets, dead, ruined, husks of worlds that had once been alive. She saw galaxies stretched into nothing, not destroyed, but consumed by something that did not devour matter, but erased existence itself. She felt history unraveling, futures collapsing, and she understood. We were not the first to reach for the unknown, but we will be the last. Then, silence. A single moment of clarity before the ship snapped back into place. Kate staggered, gasping. The room reassembled itself around her, the crew flickering into focus. Icarus groaned, metal straining, but the structure held. The void outside had retreated, no longer pressing against them, no longer rewriting them. Lynn was breathing hard. What the hell just happened? Kate swallowed, her throat raw. It had let us go. Elias stared at her. Why? She met his gaze, her own mind still struggling to hold onto the vision. The answer settled into her, heavy and absolute. Because it wanted us to understand, she murmured. It wanted us to see what happens when something goes too far. Arthur exhaled, rubbing his face. And what exactly did we see? Cade's voice was quiet. The end of everything. A deep, suffocating silence filled the cabin. Then, slowly, the monitor stabilized. The Icarus was intact. The anomaly had vanished. The void had withdrawn. Elias was the first to move. We need to leave. Now. Cade nodded. Plot a return course. We have to warn Earth. Lynn hesitated. Will they believe us? Rafik's fingers flexed. They'll have to. The engines roared to life. Space folded bent. And for the first time, humanity turned back from the unknown.